Hello, 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 hello. So welcome. Anna's just beamed in. So we're just about to start. We've done some check-ins. Anna, do you want to do a quick check-in?
Hello, lovely to see you all. Can't wait to hear about this.
Okay, so Anna is another Islingtonite, Daniel. So without too much further ado, what's to say? So this is the Climate Emergency Centre Network Zoom, one of the Wednesday talks that we'll be networking on afterwards. I met Daniel at Glastonbury Festival in a kind of a science awareness tent, and they're doing an absolutely amazing project that I'll let them tell you more about. He's from Cranfield University. So Daniel, take it away. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, and when you do want, you can share screen and your project. So over. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Phoenix, and good evening all. Welcome. I'm going to share my screen. I should, after a couple of years, be able to do this seamlessly, but it seems to get more and more difficult with different versions of Zoom. Hopefully, you can see that. Put your thumbs up or shout out. So with that kind of alarmingly large photograph of me in many years ago, yeah, I'm really honoured to have been invited by Phoenix to join this network evening tonight, and I wanted to really kind of share a couple of the projects that I've been involved in and that I lead. But just before that, I wanted to kind of start with pretty much where I've come from and where my interests are and what I do for a living. And as you can see on the slide, I am a soil scientist, and I hold a research fellowship, which is a large pot of money to do various exciting and interesting and novel things, to do hopefully high quality research which has a meaningful outcome, and I do that within the School of Water, Energy and Environment at Cranfield University. And so without going too much into this, my program is called Building Tomorrow's Soils, and really I'm interested not only in the soils that we have currently under our feet, but the soils that are yet to be developed, and the soils that we'll depend on in the next 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000 years. So there's a few contact details.
Daniel, quick technical point. Phoenix. Sorry, Daniel, quick technical point. A quick technical point. You're sometimes it's cutting out just slightly on one word or two words or so. I don't know whether that's your connection. I hope you can still share screen. Maybe if you just go to audio rather than video. What's your connection like there?
Yeah, my connection looks to be all right, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I will.
Might have been mine. Hold on.
I'll do that, and maybe that will be better.
Did anyone else have Daniel's words cutting out there, or was that just my connection? Can anyone help?
I think it's yours, Phoenix.
Okay, all right, then carry on, Daniel. Don't worry about your video. Carry on. Might have been mine.
No problem at all. And yeah, and absolutely. Please feel free to let me know if you're having technical difficulties, because it could well be my line. It normally is. So my interest in soil formation, and in a sense, I wanted to start by, well, something is in the news a few days ago about the new, well, the latest, I should say, venture to the moon. And of course, when the moon landing happened all the way back in the 1960s, one of the first things to be talked about, as Neil Armstrong landed or touched down on that moon, was about the surface, and it wasn't necessarily about this space above him. He was looking very much down on the ground, talking about the very finely grained material, which was almost like a powder, very fine powder. And we know, following that kind of mission, that a footprint from him is kind of immortalized now into the landscape of the moon. But that's nothing new. I mean, 23,000 years ago, humankind were making footprints onto the soils. This is in the White Sands National Park in New Mexico, a fossilized human footprint. And really, for me, this inspires me to think about just our connection with the soil, with the ground underneath our feet, how important it is, and has always been so important for civilizations for thousands of years. And that's no more true than the situation that we see today, where soils are such a kind of valued material for a wide variety of things. And these are the kind of sustainable development goals. You might recognize these little boxes here, but we know that soils are so important for life as we know it on the land, but also the cleanliness and the sanitation of our water systems. It provides food for humans, for animals. And soil is so important, of course, for not just the physical aspects of life, but the health and well-being aspects, the mental and psychological aspects of life. And of course, we've already heard in our catch-ups just a minute ago about new gardening initiatives, growing initiatives happening around the country. And some of those initiatives can provide not only physical benefits, but benefits to mental health as well. We know, of course, that soils and have always been kind of important for innovation and infrastructure, and of course, sustainable communities, the very fact that we need to create communities to house an increasing population, but we need to do that with care and attention to the environment. And so there's a narrative here about responsible consumption and production, and making sure that we're doing things not just for perhaps economic growth, but growth of culture, both here and abroad. So soils, in a nutshell, very important. But we also know that soils are degraded around the world. The majority of soils are moderately or highly degraded, and they are particularly fatigued in some settings in the world where soils pretty much now have past their best, perhaps have eroded off the land, they've gone into waterways and left the ground not fertile enough to provide those functions. And in some areas of the world, and particularly in our urban environments, towns and cities and so on, soils are not only degraded, but they're hidden. They're underneath the tarmac and concrete. And so you walk around and you see vast swathes of area which is hiding the soils from sight. So that kind of maximum of out of sight, out of mind rings true in many of our towns and cities. And urbanization really challenges this. Threatens the health and the accessibility, the availability of our soil resources. So with that in mind, of course, then why do I go back to this? Well, I'm interested in how we make soils part of our landscape, part of our day-to-day lives, and making sure that they are in sight and they are in mind, and that we care for them for future generations. So the idea around some of my work at Cranfield University is about, well, how do we replenish soils? We know that we take a lot out of them. We deplete nutrients and carbon and water from them, and we strip them of biodiversity. And that has, in some cases, been down to the way that we've managed the land. And we're seeing now the impacts of climate change really taking effect there. And we need to not only curb those rates of depletion, but we also need to think about replenishment. We often talk about trying to minimize impact, but it obviously is more important to think about replenishment. And of course, one of the kind of factoids that I often come out with is soil formation is very slow. It takes ages to create soil, and a hair's thickness of soil is created every year, but we lose maybe two orders of magnitude more than that in a single year. So we need to replenish, and there are ways of doing it. So here are some kind of ways, perhaps in urban environments, where we can create soils from food waste Perhaps in some areas of the world we can use the resources that come out of natural disasters, volcanic material, for instance, in Italy. I know that in Dubai at the moment, they're trying to create soils on the desert using a special liquid clay, basically irrigating the sand with clay to hold nutrients. And there's various other ways in which we can do this, but the kind of the general thing is that we need to think about how we develop and design our infrastructure so that this is part of the system. This is one way of doing it, of course. This is mycelium, so it's a kind of a mushroom-based building, fungi-based building that really, over a course of time, decomposes into the ground. And one of the things that I was thinking about in Glastonbury, in fact, this year was, well, what happens if we started to create our stages and tents and things and the infrastructure of those big festivals, one of which has just happened at the weekend, out of this kind of material, so that when everyone leaves, the buildings and the stages decompose back down into the soil and create soil. So maybe slightly wacky, but we need to start thinking innovatively and outside the box. And that brings me on to, I guess, the main highlights. So that was a roundabout way of introducing myself and my interests. But I want to talk about urban agriculture and how we might use our vacant spaces for urban food growing. And the reason for this really is that some of the areas of the world where soils are pretty much out of sight and out of mind are, of course, our towns and cities. And yet there's a paradox there, because there's obviously great concentration of people. So there's so much opportunity in towns and cities. And yet we need to think about how we utilize our spaces efficiently, especially as the population, especially our urban population, increases. So we need more homes and houses to home people. And yet we also need more space for our soils. So I want to talk about firstly a very quick whistle-stop tour through the project which led to Urban Cultivate, which was called Urban Revolution, but then I'll spend most of the time talking about Urban Cultivate, which is both of these are really kind of projects on urban agriculture. So Urban Revolution was a kind of 2.5-year project. This was one of the projects which we were showcasing at Glastonbury, which is where I met Phoenix. And this was a project which was funded by the Global Food Security Programme. And in a sense, we brought together a very diverse team in terms of our subject interests to explore the benefits of what we call urbanization in towns and cities. And what do we mean by urban? Well, what we're talking about here is kind of ruralizing the urban. So we're thinking about how we might use food growing to create benefits for the environment, for the society, and for the economy and the way of life in these spaces. So right from the start, we were thinking very much about community-led programs, but all the way through to how we navigate that with the public, through to kind of more commercial and corporate projects as well. We were thinking also about low-tech solutions, very important, that urban food growing isn't always seen to be these vertical food growing schemes which cost a lot of money and a lot of infrastructure. You know, you can actually grow outside in your back garden just as easily as companies use these indoor spaces. So yeah, private gardens, domestic household gardens, kind of public spaces as well, disused spaces, and particularly, as I'm going to talk about in a minute, vacant spaces which haven't been used, or perhaps spaces where buildings have been knocked down and we need to redevelop them. And I suppose finally a focus on fresh fruit and vegetables. We obviously realise that urban agriculture could well include pastoral farming, livestock and things, chickens and so on. But we were particularly keen on looking at fresh fruit and vegetables in this, especially as a large majority of the of the population are not consuming the recommended intake of fruit and vegetables. But this is nothing new. I mean, we're not particularly innovative in thinking here. You know, we know schemes all around the country. In fact, you're probably involved in many of these yourself. Community growing schemes, vertical zero farming schemes, green infrastructure, all the way back to the Second World War. We were looking at ways in which we could use our private gardens for digging to create the victory that we obviously needed. But what we found in our research is that there's often a very fragmented knowledge base. You know, we have little pockets of information and we don't really connect them very usefully. So Urban Revolution was a way really of connecting some of this, doing some original research, yes, but connecting research. And as a result, then building up an evidence base, which really helps us understand how urbanization can transform our food system and really create that impact for the community's health, the environment, sustainability, the resilience of our towns and cities. So that was our main aim of the programme. And my particular role in this, which led to Urban Cultivate, in Islington, was looking at the ecosystem benefits of urban agriculture, because it's not just about putting food on a plate, it's about all of the other benefits that urban agriculture, urban food growing can provide. So you know, particularly we know that we are facing climate change. We're seeing the effects of climate change on our towns and cities across the whole world, in fact, but of course pretty pronounced effects on towns and cities, from flooding to of course the hosepipe ban that many counties in the UK are currently experiencing as a result of a very unparalleled drought that we've experienced across Europe. And there has been a rising interest in what we can do in towns and cities around, you know, solving these issues or providing solutions, thinking about solutions. But when we're talking about urban food growing, so much of the time we're often thinking about the food, you know, what goes on the plate. And what we found from our review, we did a large review of over 150 peer-reviewed, academically published journal articles. And we were looking at how these edible schemes are able to deliver other things apart from just growing food. So here on the slide, you can see the range of ecosystem services which are provided by edible planting schemes. So yes, of course, we can provide food, fibre and fuel. But take a look, I mean, local climate and air quality regulation, pollination, obviously very important for biodiversity. We can create habitats for species in a way that we might not be able to without food growing. We can maintain nutrients and those vital nutrient cycling processes. And at the very top here, you can see some of those cultural and social benefits. So things like recreation, you know, people can get infused and inspired, and they can, you know, join communities like this community that we're talking about tonight. Societal relations, very, very important. So yeah, so we have a paper, and you can use your phone to get the QR code there. It's a academic paper in the journal Ecosystem Services, but I wrote a lay summary for it in the local gov website, why local authorities need to rethink the role of urban farming. And there's been a follow-up recently in The Guardian, which in fact includes the octopus communities, which I know that many in Islington are very aware of. So you know, great to network with that. And that brings me neatly on, I guess, to Urban Cultivate, and the reason, particularly the reason why I bidded for this project was coming out of some of the work that we did in Urban Revolution. I felt that we we'd cracked some of the nuts, but we'd not cracked all of them, and we needed to do some more work. So this is a project I lead with a different team this time. It's funded by the Science and Technologies Facilities Council, their food network. It's also part of the UK Research and Innovation. That's that logo in the middle there, and our logo, Urban Cultivate, in the top right. So Urban Cultivate is a project much like Urban Revolution, which is about thinking about urban food supply. I'll talk a little bit about the aim in a minute. I just wanted to showcase how many people outside of academia we have on this project, because it's all fair and well having researchers, but we really needed urban communities to engage with us. So we've got people from octopus communities, headlined by Julie Parish, who's the lead on the Octopus Community Network. We have we're so kind of grateful to have the support of Islington Council, Borough Council, but also others within those local communities as well. So we have quite a wide variety of people to support this project. And the background really to the project was a little bit like Urban Revolution, but in a sense we're doing something a little bit different here. So we have 4 problems. Those are in the black boxes on the left. We know that if we grow only on a few sites, you may be able to name a couple of sites in your local area where you grow, where there's an allotment, or maybe there's a community food garden. But if we always use those sites, then over time, as I said at the beginning, soils become overworked, it causes declines in nutrients and carbon, that natural capital. And if we place those food growing activities on a few sites, it also limits the distribution and equal accessibility. In other words, some people don't get access to those allotments. If you live right next to it, then happy days. But if you're living far away and you've not got very good access, then that's a problem. And of course, if these allotments and community gardens are only used for cultivation, so just used for food growing, then other functions in that food supply chain cannot take place. So where do you make your compost? Where do you gather your waste materials? How do you vend or distribute the food that you do grow? How does this take place if all of the spaces are just used for growing? And finally, if all these spaces are disconnected, then we have great inefficiencies in the food supply chain, and we have not just economic issues, but other issues as well for the environment. This kind of disconnected patchiness, kind of patchy distribution of spaces, rather than corridors and those kind of pathways where we can connect up different spaces in what is typically a very atomized landscape. So our aim really is to think about an innovative, local, self-sufficient way of basically growing nutritious and sustainable, resilient food, but also making sure that we are tackling things like diversity and citizens' health and well-being and social equality. And the kind of mission really then in lay terms is, well, all right, fair enough. So we have potential areas in most towns and cities to grow food and do some of these things, but how do we know where best to use, or which spaces to use? So this project in lay terms is about trying to obtain information about the characteristics of spaces in towns and cities, and particularly Islington, and I'll come on to Islington in a minute. But basically to use these data to determine how best to use that site to support food supply chains. And as I said before, it's not just about cultivating fruit and vegetables. It's about collecting waste. It's about forming new soils, about preparing the seedlings. Sometimes you need a separate space to do that. It's about food and knowledge exchange as well. And very importantly, at the bottom of the slide there, we're trying to make use of vacant and underutilized spaces. We don't want to go to the established growing sites because we know those spaces are few and far between, and yet there's so much opportunity out there if we take a look at our vacant and underutilized areas. And of course, why urban spaces? So on the left there, you can see a rooftop with Buddleia is starting to grow on the top. This is just outside Preston. And I think we have Debs from the Preston CHCEC on the call. So you might recognise this, Debs. This is next to the Travel Lodge in Preston, one of the travel lodges in Preston. When looking out of my window a year or two ago, I was smacked to see all this space not being used on top of this building. And so why vacant spaces? Well, there are so many areas just like this rooftop in our towns and cities, and so we can use these spaces in an effective way to reduce the burden on existing sites. It allows us to green more urban spaces as well. It allows us to make cities, towns and villages greener. And it also spreads the risk of disruption. So if one allotment has a disease, or it needs to be shut down, or in fact it's threatened by development, it means we've got other sites that we can rely on as well. And just on the left is, I believe, in London. It's actually not one of my photographs, but comes from one of my colleagues. This is a nice example of how we can use the space in between buildings. Not much you can do with that space otherwise, and yet here it's being used for greening. So it's a really good idea, I think, to think about these urban vacant spaces. So yeah, this is in a nutshell what we're doing here. So we're moving from left to right. We're mapping candidate spaces, and I'll tell you how we're mapping in a moment. We've decided on our functions. I showed those on a slide a minute ago, and we're kind of currently in the middle of this slide. So we're collecting data at the moment on the characteristics of the spaces, and we're going to use our colleagues in the Science and Technologies Facilities Council. We've got a data champion in this project who can churn up all this data and basically tell us which site is best for which function. And out of that, we're hoping to create a user-friendly dashboard where people can use this dashboard for their town and city, which is obviously very important. But I wanted basically to tell you literally about the way in which we're doing that first part, about the mapping of the vacant spaces, because I understand that part of the Climate Emergencies Network is about trying to identify the vacant spaces. And so there are a couple of approaches. Well, actually, there's more than a couple. There's a few that we're using here in this particular project. I should say that this project's only a year long, and we're kind of 2/3 the way through. So we're up against it time-wise, but we're hoping to continue after. So this is well, those in Islington might recognise it. This is in the middle there, you can start to see Islington Octopus Community Plant Nursery. And there's obviously buildings around this, which are residential, commercial properties, and a wide variety of different types of architecture. Different green spaces as well, but quite atomized, quite sparse in places. And we can use GIS mapping software to do a first pass. So basically, we can identify from the air spaces which are vacant, and you can see right there. I don't know if you can see my mouse actually, but right here in the in this photograph, a big vacant site not being used. Now, if you were down on the ground with all these buildings, you might not see that. And there are other spaces as well where only by a kind of airborne satellite approach can you really get to see the spaces here. And the other great thing about this, you can see how they're connected. So we're not just looking at individual spaces, but how they connect themselves in a network. And so we can turn that into this. This is one of the things we've been doing in the project so far, and that's about not just mapping spaces, but kind of clustering them based on their connectivity, based on how networks can form. So just an example, really, in the bottom of the slide, in this kind of D cluster, you can see a variety of vacant spaces which we've mapped. And in fact, this kind of crisscrossed space here, this is actually an existing growing site, which we feel can be expanded if this vacant space is utilised. This is essentially a car park that's not being used anymore, which backs onto the back of Holloway Prison. So it's not doing much at all. It's a kind of an urban wasteland. It's a vacant space and potentially suitable. But of course, at this stage, we don't know whether these spaces are necessarily best for cultivation. So what we do then, after this first pass, where we've mapped them from GIS, we've mapped the spaces, we actually go to them. And we can take some spatial data. So, all right, from the desk, you could actually do this using pretty accessible software like Google Earth. You can get the area of these spaces and some of the characteristics of these fairly easily. But often it's good to go to them in the flesh and verify what you've done. So at the moment, we're doing this kind of phase of validation where we go to a site. This is actually one of the spaces I just showed you in that cluster D, a space which is, you can start to see the effects of the summer drought in Islington. This is I think the Holloway estate. And what we're doing currently is doing some environmental, spatial and social data collection. So we're monitoring the microclimate, the air quality. Some of that actually can be done using software online, taking samples to undertake studies on the soil quality. And you might also be interested in this. So this is the different mapping approach that we're using, and it's called space syntax mapping. And basically, it's about finding out where spaces are connected, how accessible spaces are, how visible spaces are. So we can look at individual sites and we can put an urban community garden there. But what about the connectivity? How available and accessible is the space to the people that live? And we can use this mapping software, which is not about looking at individual points on the map, but looking at the lines between the points. And just to represent what this looks like, we're able, through the data that we collect on traffic flows, not just vehicle traffic, but pedestrian traffic and connectivity, to map out how connected, how accessible spaces are. So in the red, those red and orange lines, those are the areas which are less accessible, shall we say, for pedestrians to use. They're often used for cars and things, but not much else. And in the green are the roads which are more used for pedestrian traffic. And so as a result, you can kind of see areas which you may want to put an urban food growing area away from the vehicle traffic to minimize pollution, but in a space which is going to be accessible and well connected. And my partners in the project have recently done this actually in Trafalgar Square, and nothing to do with food growing this time, but they wanted to know how people move through Trafalgar Square. And it turns out that through space syntax mapping, they're able to indicate to companies in and around this area how people move through the square, so they can kind of direct people to certain areas than others. And of course, it can be used for multiple applications, not just food growing and in towns and cities, but you can use this for a variety of approaches. And finally, is the social data collection. And one of the things we're really keen to do is to integrate this project more and more, embed it in the local community. So on the left is a photograph of our launch, public launch meet and greet event, which we held at the Octopus Community Plant Nursery. And on the right, just a few days after that, I was speaking to the Islington Environment and Regeneration Scrutiny Committee about the project. And this is these are just two ways of connecting with the communities that have decision-making power. And really, it's about educating them with the knowledge, with the science that's needed to make good evidence-based decisions. But all the time, we know that we need to integrate with that community, because if not, we can suggest growing schemes where there's no appetite for it. And so we need to gauge that appetite by talking with local residents and local occupants, local people who work in that local area. So yeah, finally then, I just wanted to showcase the fact that, well, we're not just over in a year. So we're kick-starting steps towards a phase 2, which is going to be in Islington to some extent, but we're also wanting to do this across the whole of London and implementing this across other London boroughs. And that requires mapping obviously on a larger scale. And then also we want to refine the prospection of vacant sites, because if we're doing this at city scale, we need to find newer and efficient ways of mapping spaces, especially those which are maybe not visible. And I say that particularly because there's a lot of spaces underground where sites could well be, or indoor spaces where food growing can take place, and we need to embed that into our system. But we do have a method which we're testing and developing at the moment, and I really hope that through working with local people in Islington, other London boroughs, indeed other towns and cities across the country, we can develop something that can just be used not only for food growing initiatives, but other things as well, and perhaps also can be used by the CEC to identify vacant buildings and vacant spaces for your network. So so there you go. If you want to find out more information, the best email address is that one. I do have a business card with a different address, but that is the best address at the moment. We're currently kind of revamping our website for Urban Cultivate ahead of a second phase. My Twitter handle and phone number is there. So I'll pause there. Apologies, I overran a little bit there, Felix, but back to you.
That's sorry, am I muted or not? I can't quite see it. Can you hear me? That's absolutely fantastic, Daniel. Remember this phrase: "A wizard is always perfectly on time." It's from Gandalf. It helps me out a lot in my life. Fantastic. So much packed with so much great knowledge, and really, really exciting project. My wheels of my mind are spinning from that one. Lots of ways we want to help and cooperate and things. Really exciting work. But should we go over to the University Challenge panel? If you do want to put your hand up in the reactions, or physically, it does help me if you use reactions down the bottom so I can tell who's number 1, 2, 3, as we used to say in Occupying the Stack. There you go. So yeah, basically, if anyone wants to ask a question, fire away. So I think we've got Helen from Sunny Leeds, number 2, and then Jill and Ben is Sunny Islington, number 2. Over. Number 3, press. Number 4, Islington.
I know someone who's in with a sort of group that are trying to set up an urban forest, but someone he knows had identified some land near where they lived and decided, well, they could plant a couple of trees there, and the council came along and took them down again. And when they said, what have you done that for? They said, well, it's going to interfere with utilities, you know, underground cables and stuff like that. You can't plant it there. I said, well, where can we plant it? They said, well, where do you want to plant it? I said, well, can we plant some over there? No, you can't plant there because that will interfere with something else. And this went on. And in the end, they've got them to say they will map where all the utilities are and let them know. So are you working with utility companies and things like that? So
yeah, and within Cranfield, we have the Cranfield Urban observatory network, which has a lot of contacts in and around this area. So we there are mapping, there's software out there, which maybe not in the public domain, but we do have a utility map, which is really important, and especially for food growing initiatives, which may not have the roots deep enough to affect the utilities, but actually the other way around. A lot of food growers in Islington have come up to us and say, well, we need utilities to something, we need plumbing, we need water in some of these areas. So that's another way we can kind of use those initiatives there.
Yeah, and the other point is, I've heard that the trees that they plant, the street trees in most places, they make sure that they are male trees, not female ones, because if the fruit fall on the ground, they're frightened of being sued for people slipping on a rotten apple or whatever. So it's sort of, how do you get around that bit as well?
Yeah, it's one of the interesting parts of this project has certainly been learning more about the journey, which we know from taking a space to a site which can be used for food growing. Even things like waste collection, there's a lot of rules and policies in place which allows or disallows certain things to take place, like collecting waste and storing waste. So yeah, we have to work with those and find the best way through all of the well, I won't say red tape. I mean, a lot of it is obviously policy related, but it is difficult to navigate through it sometimes.
I'm just going to bung in there. The next week's talk is by Rafi from Hackney Council Arbor, a cultural officer on urban forests and how CC teams can link up with councils and landowners to plant trees. So there might be a few answers to some questions there. Moving on at a reasonable pace to Jill and Ben, the magnificent Islington cake and leaflet networkers. Over.
Thank you. No, thanks very much for that talk. It's really interesting. And to go back to your emphasis on soil quality, I mean, that's a really big issue, I think, in all this, and certainly in Islington, all over the place on the big estates. There are planters that have been put in by the council. But the soil quality, I understand, is often dreadful, and it takes so much work to address that. And to be very interested in how you see sort of practical solutions to it. I mean, I guess it's obviously partly a composting issue and it's a food waste issue, and how do you get food waste? How do you get people to do that and do all the hard work of the composting? But I also wanted to ask, even in Octopus, we do rely on going out to these big suppliers of soil and getting big bags, in big plastic bags full of soil of various varieties. I've no idea about where that soil comes from. Is that a good thing? What are the environmental consequences of shifting soil around in big bags? So be very interested to hear what you've got to say about that.
Yeah, it's a very timely question, Ben, and I was only out in London yesterday with one of the large, London-based companies which places these kind of schemes all over the place, particularly the companies which manufacture the soil and obviously import them in. A lot of the soil in London comes from Kent, and often is made to a specification which has to pass a number of criteria. The problem is that those criteria are about 30 years old now. So the spec for most soils, the recipes are 20, 30 years old and aren't suitable necessarily, aren't the best to function in a healthy, sustainable and obviously resilient way. So what we were doing yesterday is looking at some of these soils and collecting samples of them. And I can say that one of the soils we tested was about 88% sand. And that's a soil which was placed only about a year ago now down on London. And of course, in this climate, sand, as you know, doesn't hold water very well. And they're putting liters, 100 or 200 liters every day onto these beds, hoping that the moisture will soak up. Problem is, of course, the sand won't soak it up very well, and there's not much organic matter going in either. So without those local community composting initiatives, and without us actually redeveloping the specs for a lot of these soils, we're going to be in trouble, I think, in the future if we want to start using some of these soils for growing, greening the
Nice,
towns and cities.
Daniel. Can I just move the ball along just a little bit for Debs and then Anna? We'll probably carry on till a bit after 5 past or so, maybe 10 past. See how we go. But thank you very much. Debs, have you got a question for the university panel? Over. University challenge, Preston.
Yeah, just where I was going to go. I guess then, because you was in Preston, you must have heard of Let's Go Preston. I take it, and I knew where you were because my mum lives off at Road. Yeah, so we were thinking about doing some urban gardening, but does it not require a lot of maintenance? Obviously, so if you've got minimal time, it's got to be a bit difficult to do some urban guerrilla gardening type stuff. And then also, what about I was watching something about a move away from more traditional food what we grow in the UK to different more exotic trees and stuff like that. So how do we make that move, and how do we know? Because obviously up here it's a different climate slightly than down south, so I don't know nothing about soil. I try and make some compost and that in my garden and grow things in pots and that, but I haven't got really the slightest clue how to what veg to grow in what soil and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
I think and then needing to pass that on to other people as well, it's it's quite daunting, really.
Yeah, the time component is quite a fascinating one. During the lockdown, we did a test, we did a little study in Bedfordshire, and we found that people actually during the lockdown had a little bit more time, and then kind of stopped after the lockdown ended. They went back to their ways. Sometimes you can save a bit of time if you're growing fruit and vegetables in your garden. You're not going out to the supermarket, but there's obviously a time component to that. It depends how busy you are and how extensive your schemes want to be. The exotic food actually very interesting because of course we're now growing things in this country which we wouldn't have been able to, wine vineyards and things. We've seen those kind of increase just because of the changes in temperature and rainfall. But I think generally speaking, we need to obviously manage expectations. We're not always going to be able to grow everything all times of the year. And I think there might be, speaking personally, I think there's a great romance in eating seasonally.
Just a quick one there, Daniel. I hope that helps out so much. Can we just hop over to Belle? She's got to go because of her daughter at 8. Just Belle's one of the main people running Islington. Just do you want any feedback, comment, input, or a link up for future Islington corporations? Belle, over.
Yeah, I am really keen. Anna's here as well, who's my co-founder. There's a co-founder. She's got a question. We'd love to get you in, Dan. I mean, and together with Ben and Jill, and let's talk about this and create some of those networks that we can do in the climate centres. I'm going to go and pack a bag for my daughter so she can go on a sleepover. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thanks. Good night, everyone. Stay well.
Good night.
Bye.
Right, they did have a big map at the Islington Centre at one point with green spaces on it, I think. Coming over to Anna, over.
Yeah, well, I was going to bring up the map. The map's my pride and joy. I love the map. And we have been working with Jill and Ben, part of the climate group, but they're also very embedded into the Octopus group. So this map, if we could make it work, it's a physical map. It's 3 by 2 meters. And the children love it when they come in. So we could stick stickers on it and do some of the mapping. I could see it being a really lovely kind of workshop. I think that's we're all about connecting. So anything we can do to help you connect stuff, we're way up for. And we've got a lovely map.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think that'd be a great work. We got a little bit of funds in the project to do some workshops and stuff like that. So yeah, we'd be really keen to do more on that in the future.
Okay, nice one, Anna. Let's definitely get connections and get something happening in Islington there. I'm going to do a quick fire because we're closing a bit on time. I'll probably carry on till 5 past. So, but just to say, people aware of Incredible Edible. Todd Morden, some grandmas just started growing on bus stops and everywhere. I think they've spread around the country as well. Lots of inspiration from the talk there. I'd really like to work closer with you on how we can identify both growing spaces, urban and rooftops. I love the satellite thing that you can tune in and work out vacant spaces there. We actually used to run a community centre 10, 15 years ago at the back of St George's Theatre. I know on your satellite thing there, we've still got big email lists for people around the area. So yeah, we'd like to work with you as the CEC network to build this in Islington and move it out to other boroughs, particularly on identifying spaces. There's quite a few other bigger networks we can link you in from down the years, such as Diggers and Dreamers, a network of co-op and communities. It's a fascinating group called Crops Not Shops out in Essex. They spread around the country. They're trying to get bits of land to grow food rather than shopping. There's a Land Workers Alliance. There's the Land Magazine and Land Justice Network. So yeah, definitely let's keep this ball rolling. Another group, I think you've talked to Jules, landexplorer.cc. They've been trying to do some similar work. I think you know each other. But yeah, let's just keep this going. And if you can roll out a model that we can put out to other CEC teams, they can start mapping anything to make it easier for people to map vacant space to grow food and vacant property. And the last I did, Cuba actually had to do this very, very fast when they had an oil embargo and couldn't get any all the stuff for land growing food. So they grew everywhere on every rooftop. And then of course there's the World War II, Digging for Victory, which we need a bit more for community food resilience. Let's take a note from that book. Coming over to Jill and Ben. Over.
I wanted to ask kind of the practicalities about how it's going to move from all the great work you've done in kind of researching and mapping and such to actually getting some growing on the ground in some of these places. I'm interested to know whether the council are truly helping or are just putting their name to it, because they'd be very happy to do the latter. And I just, I'm interested to know whether they kind of think they have a team that are actually going to make this happen, or whether it's down to us.
Well, I mean, the project has always had the support of Islington Borough Council, particularly public realm, the green space, and increasingly housing. We're finding that a lot of these spaces are kind of managed by the housing department rather than public realm and green space. So yeah, but we've had great support. We had a great workshop actually in July, bringing the local community, particularly decision makers from Islington together to talk about ways. What we're not doing on this project at the moment is thinking about implementation, because obviously the project team as it currently stands, we don't have the expertise to necessarily put that kind of some of these solutions into place. I mean, the bricks and mortar that's needed for some of this. But what we are doing is moving towards making really good recommendations, evidence-backed recommendations on how and where these spaces can be and be used. And what we're hoping, of course, is that through working with the council seamlessly at the end of this project, going into hopefully a new project next year, we can start turning the stuff on a 2D map into a three-dimensional reality for the local community. So yeah, I mean, I as for their plans, I know that they've recently won X amount of funding to green the borough. Quite substantive opportunities coming out of that, I think. So and we definitely want to be part of that. So yeah, I'm optimistic, but obviously we know that with local government and national government flux, as we see so often, it can be a lot of delays and barriers to these. But the hurdles are there for us to jump over, and we're hoping to do that together.
Thank you.
All right, I think, you know, I'm just going to hop over to Anna for a quick one, and then we could do some quick checkouts, just a couple of lines each or so. Thank you very much, guys, for your precious hour. Anna, was that hand still up? Or
Yeah, just a really quick question, Dan, because I know that you're looking at all urban spaces where you can grow outside, but I also am very interested in kind of using spaces for vertical farming, and I don't see most of our retail coming back, to be honest. I know that's quite pessimistic. So I'd be quite interested in doing some of that as well, I think. I think Debenhams on Oxford Street is going to be my vertical farmer. So.
We have a Debenhams here in Oxford as well, and it's currently not doing too much. And these are definitely spaces which could be used so much for urban greening and growing. And you know, we're hoping obviously we can expand this project to think about those indoor spaces, those underground spaces. Really important work.
Can I ask what octopus is?
So apologies. Yeah, the octopus communities is and I'm sure actually maybe Jill and Ben probably can define it better than me, but octopus communities is a network of people, local people in and around Islington, who are interested in growing food, local food. They're volunteers. I think it's a network of volunteers who spend time managing sites to grow food for the community, and of course there's a number of sites. And the reason why I think it's called Octopus, I'm not absolutely sure on this, but I think it's because there's a lot of different. It has one central hub in Islington, but it's developing all the way over, like Ben's showing in that. So yeah, that's the reason why it's called Octopus.
Okay, well, let's get the Octopus networking web going and get those green spaces growing, get the green fingers out, and as the old World War II jobby, can you see that one? Dig in for victory, that's up on the wall here.
Very good.
Okay, so my checkout would be, thank you very much, Daniel, absolutely incredibly informative, excited. Let's get this going. Let's try and do a short form out to the network and say, how can we all help to identify growing spaces and vacant spaces? And it's absolutely incredible for you know, food sovereignty and for food and community resilience into the future. Okay, I will pass over to Helen.
Yeah, gotta go. So great listening to you. I've been taking notes from you, so I'll pass it on to people here and hope it grows. Thank you. Oh, pass to Debs.
Yeah, kids are interrupting me. Hang on a minute. Yeah, it was a good speech. Yeah, good talk. Yeah, it's interesting. I need to get in touch with do some more with Let's Grow Preston. It's like on my to-do list. Yeah, I'll pass to Anna.
Hiya, yeah, that was brilliant. Let's work out what we can do practically next. I'm going to have to run because my fantastic basil plant is about to be stripped by two 13-year-olds, and I want them to do it properly. So thank you, that was really good. And I'll pass on to Jill and Ben.
Hey, nice and
Hi, yeah, thank you, Dan. That was really great, very interesting, and very keen to be involved in the implementation and trying to further kick the council up the backside to help us do it.
Thanks, yes, thanks very much. Great talk. Very interesting. Thank you for all you're doing. Daniel?
No, I just wanted to, thank you so much, everyone, for all your comments, and Phoenix, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really really great.
Well, we've recorded. We want to work it out, and others can see this and learn from it and link up with you. Linda or Daniel, you with us? I know Linda might have to go do something. Okay, you need to unmute. Actually, hold on, Linda, you need to unmute. I've asked you.
I'm unmuted. So I'd like to talk to you more about, we spoke with some young folks who were doing very small but neighborhood type, remember the guys at Ilford who were doing composting, and they were a really good group. We might be able to bring them in. And I also would like to talk to you more about biochar and feeding this into the soil, into these bad areas. And I also want to talk about brown lands. Isn't that what they call it? Brown spaces? What do they call that, Phoenix?
Brownfield, it's a planning designation.
Yes.
Brown.
Because there's a lot we can do with that, and especially if we're fond of hemp. All right. We'll speak soon.
Remedial plants. Nice. Let's do that. Daniel, are you with? No. Daniel? Okay, I think you had to do a gardening job or something, but okie doke. All right, guys, thank you very, very much for your timing. And as traditional play you one tune. You can beam out when you want, but here's a nice one from San Jamaica. I want you to get together. Thank you very much for coming, Daniel. Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Rafi's talking about arboreal culture. He's the tree officer for Hackney. So come along next week if you can, 7 p.m. and keep networking. Plants and trees, plants and food, wherever you are. And we want you to get together and take action for the environment, grow some food, plants and trees. Thank you very much, everyone. Nice one. Top tune here by San Germain. All right, let's save the chat. All right, I think it's about good. All right, let's stop recording. I want you to get together and plant trees. Take action every day. Find those vacant spaces. Find those places to grow food. And dig in for victory. Our future generations and the life dependent on it.